It's a pleasure to be here. That was an experience, I think it's fair to say. Second time I've seen that, and it still hits hard. I have been a fan of the Oscars since I was a kid, even living in the UK as a child. I watched the Oscars on a Sunday night. The time difference was a killer. But I would watch and cheer along when my favorite actors or movies won. And I'll tell you what, March 2nd this year, I cheered louder than I've ever cheered watching the Oscars on television as Bassel Adra, who you saw in that film, went up on stage with Yuval Abraham to accept the Oscar for Best Documentary and used his speech on the Dolby Theatre stage to 20 million Americans watching at home to call out ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. It's a big deal. That doesn't happen very often. The tectonic plates are moving to see that happen. So it was a big deal to see the Oscar win for this film, a big deal to hear that speech. And yet, the tragedy is that since that movie came out and won the Oscar, the violence in the West Bank has gone up, not down. Hamdan Bilal, who you saw in the film, was beaten by settlers in the wake of that Oscar win. More than 40,000 Palestinians living in the West Bank have been displaced from their homes, the biggest displacement for over 50 years. More than 100 Palestinians killed in the West Bank alone just since the start of this year, at least 17 children. And so it is important that we have these events and these screenings and we watch the film and we tell our friends and we have the discussion we're about to have. Some people don't want us to have these discussions. I believe it was pretty hard to put the film on tonight in Congress. The Republicans in charge made us move rooms. The party of free speech made us move rooms because they don't want us to have these discussions. Apparently the snowflakes in charge of Congress are scared of an Oscar-winning film documentary. What a weird world we live in now. But we're not going to be silenced tonight, and I appreciate you all coming out tonight. We have an all-star panel to my left. Josh Paul is co-founder of a new policy, which some of you here on the Hill may be familiar with from its work. He previously served as the director for the State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs, from where he resigned on October the 17th, 2023, in protest of what he called the Biden administration's blind support for Israel. Dr. Debra Shushan is a Middle East policy expert who began her career as an academic, but Hill staffers here are more likely to know her from her time at J Street, where until recently she served as Director of Policy. And Zaha Hassan is a human rights lawyer and a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Previously, she served as a coordinator and senior legal advisor for the Palestinian negotiating team. Thank you all for coming tonight. Josh, I believe you're the only member of the panel who hadn't seen the film prior to tonight. So I'm going to open with you. As someone who's followed this for years, you are, quote unquote, an expert on this issue. And yet watching that, what was your reaction to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mehdi, and thank you to our hosts for this evening, Congresswoman Jayapal, Senator Welch. There are three, I think, reactions that stood out for me. The first is this demolition of homes, cutting off of water, evacuation orders. Don't you dare tell me that this conflict began on October 7th. This conflict accelerated. The tactics that we see in this movie have been accelerated both in the West Bank and in Gaza. But I think it is very clear that this is a continuation of a pattern. And I cannot imagine, if I was in that situation, that I would have one fraction of the tenacity or the dignity of the people of Masafa Yatta. The second thing, thinking about one of the antagonists in this movie, the Israeli security forces, I'm reminded of that line from the Gospel of Mark that says, what profit it a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? And then finally, because there is a third actor here, there is a second antagonist, and we are it. As I was watching that movie, I was taking note of the JCB bulldozers, yes, the M4 rifles, the M113 armored vehicles, the self-propelled howitzers, all paid for with our money appropriated in this very building, supported, I should add, by intelligence, facilitated, again, through this very government, and I think we can go a floor down if we want to talk about that. We are a key actor here, and I think that that is something that all of us should hold to heart and should take the words that Bassel used to introduce this film with us, that this is on us to address, this is on us to resolve.
Well said. Deborah, dare I ask, what what has been the reaction in the circles that you move in? What has been the reaction amongst, how can I describe it, liberal Jewish critics of the occupation of the Netanyahu government to see this so viscerally displayed on screen? And it's a joint Israeli-Palestinian production. People forget that. It's Yuval Abraham and Basil Hamdan and their colleagues. I just wonder what's the reaction been like since you saw the film the first time around? Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
Mehdi, I don't know, even among more liberal Jewish Americans, that many have seen this film, to be perfectly honest with you. I would certainly like to see that change. I would like to see, in my dreams, synagogues would be showing this film so that people in our community what they hear about what is happening in the West Bank or what's happening in Israel, Palestine is very different from what we see on the screen. I think I would love to be able to share with you an understanding of how it's being received in the community. But I think more than anything, there are those who want to make sure that no one sees this film, whether it's the mayor of Miami Beach, who, there was an art house that was showing the film on city property and he threatened to take their lease. I'm sure that a lot of people who would be moved by the film would assume that there is something biased about it, that there is something anti-Israel, maybe even anti-Semitic about it. And there aren't opportunities to see it that there should be. I mean, it's not being released. It's
very hard to find.
It's hard to find. It's hard to find. So I would love to be able to give you an answer to that. Let's have a lot of showings and come back.
Yes.
But I can't.
I mean, I've watched the film twice now. Once was 50 miles from my house. Yeah. The other was in the United States Capitol. Those are not easy places.
I had to seek it out. I mean, in order to see it. Yeah.
Zaha, you are someone who probably more than anyone else on this panel or in this room knows this issue and this place inside out. What stood out to you from watching that film as someone who is very familiar with that terrain and what the Israelis get up to and what the Palestinians are enduring? What stood out to you watching that film?
I mean, the first thing that hit me, and this is the first time I really watch it from beginning to end, was just in the very beginning when Basil basically says, we just need to get the message out, essentially. If people knew, then surely the United States would put pressure on Israel and this would end. And, here we are. Of course, I'm quite mindful of the fact that we're in the middle of what most people are now calling a genocide in Gaza and the deliberate starvation of the population there. And I have to say that I fear we're becoming desensitized because of what's going on in Gaza. So in watching this, my mind is, going to Gaza and thinking, wow, what naivete that we had in the beginning of this film to say that if only people knew, and that's all that needs to happen. And we've now entered 19 months of mass atrocity after mass atrocity in Gaza, and I can recall on October 12th when the Israeli defense minister said he was going to cut off food, water, and basically all essential supplies to Gaza, and not a peep from the U.S. president about that. No, condemnation, no insistence that, aid be allowed in. Instead, we heard about self-defense. And so I'm very concerned that what's happening with what's gone on in Gaza is we're becoming groomed to accept mass atrocities now. And this isn't just a problem for Palestinians. It isn't a problem just for people in the West Bank. It's a problem for all of us because we are all less safe when we don't uphold norms that protect us all.
Well said. Josh, what's interesting about No Other Land, of course, is that the filming began well before October the 7th and what's happening in Gaza. And it's the West Bank, which has been overlooked over the past, for obvious reasons, understandable reasons even, over the last 19, 20 months. And yet what I've always found so fascinating is the entire raison d'etre for what is happening in Gaza, for the supporters of it, is Hamas, right? But Hamas. Here we are in the occupied West Bank, which is not controlled by Hamas, where there are no hostages. And as we saw in that film, there are no real security implications of what's happening, right? They're just smashing down houses and saying, closed military zone, and children asking, why is my house being destroyed? The West Bank is a very stark reminder of, can I say this on the Capitol, the bullshit that is pushed by people who support what Israel's doing in Gaza.
Yes, I think that's right. And, there was one point in the film here towards the end where they revealed that a leaked Israeli confidential memorandum said the only reason that we imposed these destruction orders, these demolition orders, and this military zone was to prevent the expansion of the Palestinian population. And that reminds me of an exchange I had when I was working for the US security coordinator in the West Bank, where the IDF took us on a tour of Jenin. And they said, every time we go into this neighborhood, they shoot at us. So we have to shoot back, and there are always clashes here. And I said to the colonel who was leading the tour, so why don't you not go into that neighborhood? And he sort of seemed struck like he'd never even thought of this. And I think that there is something in there that part of what is happening here is to drive out this conflict. Part of it is certainly the settlement expansion, which, oh, by the way, is also greatly funded with US private dollars through US charities. But part of it is this perpetuation of this sense of insecurity on the part of, I think, Israelis by the government of Israel, but that in no way, I think, compares to the perpetual insecurity that it must feel like to never know if you can drive down a street safely, to never know if your home will be there when you come back to it, to never be able to sleep safely in your bed and know that you will wake up without the army at your door.
Debra, the film, as you said a moment ago, is hard to watch, right? So it's difficult to see. A lot of good people say, well, I haven't had a chance to see it because I don't know where it is. Now you have Congressman Jayapal, Senator Welch tonight, putting on this film, getting past the Republican leadership's blocks, getting the film out tonight. And yet, correct me if I'm wrong, I counted during that screening, 5 members of Congress came to watch out of 535 members of Congress. That in itself speaks volumes about the battle in this place to get members of Congress to at least mildly reflect public opinion on this issue.
Well, that is the challenge, for sure. And I think, it would always be a challenge under any circumstance, knowing American politics on this issue, to get members of Congress to come and see this film. I think one point that I just want to make is that we are all today in this room, I venture to say, overwhelmed over the last several months with changes that have been happening here at home. And so, and members of Congress are absorbed with many, many other issues that are extremely pressing. One point that I do want to make is that it's come home for me ever since October 7th, how intertwined our domestic politics are with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The impacts that we have had here at home, the impact on our democracy as certain members of our society are working very hard to try to shut down pro-Palestinian activism, and the impact that that is having on universities, on our democratic institutions is absolutely profound. The impact that it's had on the Jewish community and the divides that have been inflamed and exacerbated in the Jewish community. And so, to the extent that any members of Congress perhaps didn't come tonight because they are absorbed with a million other things, I would just say, I would hope that since October 7th, it's become clear that this is an issue that, I think the Biden administration, I think before October 7th happened, they were pretty clear that they didn't want to deal with this issue.
Yeah.
Right? I would hope that at least one lesson that we have learned is that this horrible conflict that has gone on for decades and decades needs to be resolved. And one of the key tools that I hope we will learn from this film that we have to address it is what the makers of the film call co-resistance. And I want to say that for my time working on this issue, one of the greatest privileges I feel I've had is to get to know Palestinian peace activists, of course, but also activists like Yuval and other Israelis who are incredibly passionate and know, as Yuval indicated, that Israelis won't ever really be free either until Palestinians are free. So that was a long and winding.
Well, it was also a very generous answer. You're more generous than I am. The cynic in me thinks that if this had been an Oscar-winning film about Ukrainian villagers standing up to Russian ethnic cleansing, there would be dozens and dozens of members of Congress in this room watching it. But that's the cynic in me. Zaha, let's be positive for a moment. Or if I can call this positive.
With me?
Public opinion is changing, right? I mentioned the kind of reflection of public opinion. We had a big Pew poll out last month, which showed 52% of Americans have a negative view of Israel as a result of what they are seeing now, belatedly, at least on social media. That goes up to 69% amongst Democrats. Did you ever think you would see the polling shift amongst the American public in that way? I think it's the first time that's happened in Pew polling.
No, I think I had always hoped that the American people, if they did know what their tax dollars are being spent on, if they understood the amount of political cover that the U.S. Puts out to protect Israel while it's engaging in mass atrocities. I always believed that Americans, if they knew and had access to information, credible information, would understand the injustice and not want to be a part of that. I had no doubt about that. But the question was getting out that information and then also making sure that representatives would then take up that challenge from their constituents and actually do something about it. And I think that's the disconnect that we find, is that despite the fact that we have so many Americans, not even just Democrats, independents and a growing number of Republicans, and including evangelicals, young evangelicals, don't want to be associated with what's happening in Israel-Palestine and don't want to be funding it and supporting it. Despite that growth, we still have only 5 members of Congress here willing to watch the movie. We still have a Republican leadership that would try to block us from having it screened here. So that's the problem, and I think that goes to the issue of why we're seeing so much effort being put into suppressing dissent, suppressing campus speech, preventing students from protesting, arresting students, stripping them of their student visas. All of these things, they're not accidental. They're coming at a time when we're starting to see this change.
They're certainly not accidental, and the New York Times reported on the Heritage Foundation's Project Esther a couple of days back. I should point out that Zateo reported on it 6 months ago, so you know where to go to get your news first. Shameless plug. Josh, before I go to the audience, one question to you, which is you run a think tank now, well, a pressure group. How do you describe a new policy?
I'll call it a lobbying organization.
A lobbying organization. When you watch films like this and you see what's out there, the kind of raw material that's there, what is your goal when you're lobbying here in Congress in regard to, for example, US policy on the West Bank? What is obviously, we all want an end to the conflict. We want, motherhood and apple pie. What is the realistic goals in 2025 for someone like yourself and an organization like New Policy in a building like this?
So I think a realistic goal, I think there are two. I think, unfortunately, the world we live in, you can show 1,000 painful images. If it is something on the other end of the world, very often people will say, well, that's just life. That's just the way the world is. I think it is, first of all, driving home the point that this is our piece of the world. This is our action in the world. And that what we are doing is fundamentally counter to, first of all, everything I was ever taught about what American values are supposed to be. And frankly, against everything that is currently in America's interest. Being complicit in this, spending our taxpayer money on this, shredding our international credibility for this, destroying the rules-based international order for this, silencing students at home for this, is not in our interest. And I think that is one of the first things. The other thing, and you would think this would be more achievable, but is for us and our lawmakers particularly to ensure that our government follows the law, because we do, in fact, have laws on the books that say we cannot provide that sort of military assistance to units that are engaged in that sort of behavior, and yet we do it. So I think that there is an Overton window to be shifted here. I think that there is a lot of education that needs to take place, but there's also a political problem that we need to unplug in order to allow what I know actually many of the members here in Congress, including many of them who were not here with us tonight, know and will say in private, but will not say in public, that what we are doing is wrong.
Well said. I would challenge anyone to watch that film and watch the scenes of Israeli soldiers pushing Palestinian children onto the ground, onto chairs, and saying, as they destroy their houses, and telling them to shut up and say, hey, that's the most moral army in the world. Ladies and gents, let's open it up to audience discussion. It's late. I do want to get some audience reactions. We do have a microphone to go around. I think the members who were here have left, so we're going to go to ordinary folks who are here tonight. Gentleman there has his hand up. Do we have a microphone for the? There's one coming on your left. Yes, sir. Well, let's just see if Deborah agrees with you. The dam will break. The groundswell is there. People are, even in the Jewish community, saying, no more, not enough.
I mean, so Jewish Americans are an interesting lot, right? I mean, we're, roughly 70-ish%, vote for Democrats reliably. There's certainly a minority within our community, then they tend to skew more Orthodox who are, et cetera. I don't know if I see yes, there are plenty of Jewish Americans who are outraged by this, but there are also a number, perhaps Mehdi, you, I know on occasion have used the phrase progressive except Palestine, right? Who, are progressive on absolutely everything. Look, I used to be like that when I was growing up. I even remarked to myself, like, oh, isn't it interesting? I'm progressive about just about everything, but like, I feel differently about Israel. And at some point I decided, like, no, it actually can't work that way. But no, I mean, there are still plenty of folks within our community who,
How much has the fallout from October the 7th, especially the domestic fallout with the, dare I use the word debate, it's not a debate, but the furore over anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism on campuses, and people saying there's an existential threat to Jewish communities in the US, the Republicans weaponizing it in many ways. How much of that has forced liberal Jews to say, look, I am concerned about Palestine and the West Bank, but I'm more concerned about this right now?
That's a great question. I don't have, data to back this up. So this is more, but from my perch, here's what I experienced. The Netanyahu government was the ultra right-wing Netanyahu government was in power starting, they came into power right at the end of 2022, right? We had months, right, of protests over the judicial reforms, overhaul, coup, whatever you want. And that was a real moment that I think it dawned on a lot of Jewish Americans when they saw, on the one hand, you have Netanyahu attacking Israeli democracy. On the other hand, you have hundreds of thousands of, I mean, in a country of only, 9 million people, hundreds of thousands out on the streets protesting. And all of a sudden people realized, oh, it's not so obvious actually what pro-Israel means. Like I could be this kind of pro-Israel or I could be that kind of pro-Israel, right? And there was a real moment, I think, and then October 7th happened and stuff got a lot more complicated, right?
That's for sure. Okay, let's go back to the audience, take some more questions. I'm going to go to the hand at the back there. Well, I'm going to put that question actually to Zaha, because of course, the great victims of that smear are the victims of Zionism who say we are not being anti-Semitic, we're being anti-Zionism. Has that argument shifted at all, do you think, over the last 80 months? With all the insanity on college campuses, with now the Republicans trying to pass anti-Semitism legislation in this building, which would criminalize, in many ways, criticism of Israel. But they carved out an exception, by the way, folks, I don't know if you know this, that said we can still say that the Jews killed Jesus. They literally carved that exception out. But you can't say free Palestine. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think especially after the Trump administration took office and we saw all of this, crackdown on students and those who hold foreign passports, it's starting, I think, to set in among people that something's terribly wrong. Something's gone completely awry. When a student who writes an op-ed, calling out her university for not speaking out against the atrocities in Gaza can be picked up off the street, at dusk, and not know who's taking her, completely disappeared. I think people are starting to really get concerned that we've taken this way, way too far. But I think really it's going to take a lot more engagement by Jewish Americans to really call it out as well, that, critique of Israel, like critique of the US government, is completely fine. And in fact, that's good because we want to have debate and discussion and thrash around ideas. But it shouldn't be used, this idea of critique of Israel shouldn't be weaponized by saying it's anti-Semitic to do so. I think people are starting to get it now. It's unfortunately taken a lot of students losing their student status and being deported, but I think it's really starting to set in.
And it's probably not helpful to the people doing the weaponizing that they're stupid enough to go after the likes of Miss Rachel. Or in the UK, Gary Lineker, those of you following, sports broadcaster who's just quit the BBC after speaking up for Palestinians for the last 18 months. All right, let's take another question. The gentleman here is waiting in the yellow cap. There's a microphone to your left. So the question for the gentleman is about, is President Trump doing something different? Is there an America First investment policy going to the Gulf over Israel? Josh is the expert. I'm going to defer to him on this, but correct me if I'm wrong, Marco Rubio did bypass Congress like Antony Blinken did and send several $1 billion of military aid to Israel in February, I think it was, right? Earlier this year?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And in fact, I was at a confirmation hearing up here just last week for the new Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs, who in his opening statement, which of course has to be cleared by the White House, named his top priority as flowing arms to Israel. And so I think, look, President Trump, you asked if he's doing something different. He's always doing something different. But I think the challenge that we have is much deeper and much deeper rooted, and I think flows much deeper into American politics than the decisions or the actions of any one person can really shift, even the President of the United States, were he so minded. I do think that the point of hope actually goes to where you began, which is to talk about this repression. And I think that, to be honest, those who are pursuing this repression are really in a bit of a bind. And I think of, for example, I'll name them, AIPAC here, right? And groups like that, where, I was in a college about a year ago talking to students, and a kid said to me, I don't care about the Middle East, I don't care about Palestine, I don't care about international relations, but when you start arresting my classmates, I care. And here's the bind that they are in. that if you don't continue the repression, they will lose. But if you do continue the repression, they will lose. And that, I think, is the hope here, is the opportunity here, that there has been an overreach, but there cannot be a walk back.
All right, let's try and take a couple more questions from the audience. We'll go to the lady here. You want to wait for the microphone to come to you?
Thanks for this. Josh, I actually wanted to follow up on what you were talking about with regard to Rubio and Blinken overriding and continuing arms sales to Israel. We have export control laws, we have wayfinding, we have all of these things in place. Our commitments in the multilateral regimes that we are obliged to remain committed to, and you alluded to, global order if we don't comply with them. Why is it that we have specific clauses only for Israel and not for other countries that allow us to do this, where we know there are human rights violations, and yet we override and say emergency national security issues? So why is it for that one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there are all that many specific exemptions or exceptions for Israel in the law. I think the problem is more, and this is a useful note to those of you in this room who are staffers who are drafting legislation, don't make the people who enforce the law also be the people who make the policies under the law, right? So, for example, if you recall, there was a case last year that was brought by the Committee for Constitutional Rights, Center for Constitutional Rights, on behalf of a group of Palestinian Americans against the Biden administration at the time, seeking an injunction on arms transfers. And part of the Biden administration's defense against it was that there's no private right of action. Even under the Genocide Convention, which the US is party to, you cannot, as an individual who has lost 100 members of your family, sue the Biden administration, sue the US government for facilitating that genocide, for providing the arms. Now, if the Department of Justice wants to point to someone in the Department of State and have them arrested, that's one thing, right? But that's never going to happen. So as we think about how we write our laws, we need to make sure that they are written in a way that binds the executive to apply them.
Okay, anyone else want to ask a question? What's it going to take to change politicians in particular in the media on the issue of the G word, genocide? Zaha, you're the person who raised the genocide word tonight. It's interesting, a Dutch newspaper last week interviewed 7 leading genocide scholars, and all 7 of them said it's definitely a genocide, including an Israeli researcher who said, I didn't think it was in the first half of 2024, but I definitely think it is now. Zaha, what's it going to take to change people on this very thorny and contentious issue?
I mean, I think we're already seeing it, right? We're starting to see European leaders in particular really start to step up. France, the UK, and Canada have not used the genocide word, but they have talked about now having some consequences for Israel, taking some serious consequences. We've also seen the Europeans talk about not continuing with the EU-Israel Association Agreement. So again, consequences, not using the genocide word, but consequences. But we have also seen the EU, the former EU Special Representative on Foreign Affairs talk about the genocide word. And we are starting to hear more harsh language coming from different UN officials with regards to what Israel's doing. So I think we're on the cusp of it. Unfortunately, in the US, our politics is a bit different. I don't have to explain that to anybody in this room. So it's going to take more pressure from academics who study genocide, more pressure from constituents pushing on this issue. Unfortunately, the images, I mean, I would think just seeing the images on the ground, seeing what the emaciated bodies of these young children in Gaza would be enough to be able to say, this is not okay, this is in fact a genocide, but that hasn't happened. And so again, I think it's a matter of the politics in this country that is holding it back.
Although, to be fair, the President of the United States said genocide the other day. He was just talking about white Afrikaners in South Africa. Nearly. Deborah, I got to ask a serious question about the genocide issue, which is shortly after October the 7th, a Jewish friend of mine blocked me on social media and said, you can criticize Israel all you want, but only an anti-Semite or a fool would dare say genocide. It's not a genocide. What a ridiculous thing for you to say, Mehdi. This was late October, early November 2023. There is a sense amongst some in the Jewish community that to accuse Israel of carrying out a genocide is a blood libel. It's the thing that the Jews endured the worst, the Holocaust. And a lot of them are not aware, as the gentleman pointed out, that there are leading Israeli Holocaust historians, Amos Goldberg at the Hebrew University, Omar Bartov here at Brown, a bunch of them, Raz Siegel, who've come out and said, it's a genocide.
And I want to make this point. And I may differ with my fellow panelists here, with whom I agree, obviously, about many things. And perhaps I would disagree with the questioner as well. The most important thing to me is not at all whether or not we use the word genocide. It is not whether we use the word apartheid. It is that we agree. It is not whether we use the phrase ethnic cleansing. It is that we agree on a set of facts about what is actually happening on the ground, and we decide that something needs to change, and we change policy. That's what matters to me. And I have to say, I mean, I think, Mehdi, you made the point very well that the word genocide, there is no question that for many people within the Jewish American community who could absolutely agree with us that this is wrong, that something needs to change. But you open up the conversation with the word genocide and like, la, 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 it's over, right? They block you. So my plea on this particular issue is please let's not, I mean, I totally respect if other, you know, if folks disagree with me and they feel like this particular term is, you know, is the hill that they're gonna die on, like, okay. But from my perspective, as someone who has, you know, been working in the Jewish American community and in the business of trying to bring people along and change hearts and minds, if that is the hill that you're gonna die on, you are gonna miss the opportunity to reach out to a lot of people. So take that for whatever it's worth.
Zaha, do you want to briefly respond to that before I go back to the audience?
I mean, I understand the sensitivities around the use of the word, absolutely, but I also think labeling something correctly is very important, and Palestinians shouldn't always be exceptionalized in this way. And I mean, we call things genocide in other contexts, and we don't even wait for all of this consensus among different genocide scholars. And I think that one of the biggest problems with this Palestine-Israel conflict is the way in which Palestinian lives have been so dehumanized that we can't even call things out anymore. And I totally get what you're saying, and I totally understand for, you know, members of the Jewish community how emotive the word genocide is. But there's a reason why it's so emotive too for Palestinians. And so
I'm going to go back to the audience to see if there's one more question before we finish. I do think we should bring the panel back to some consensus and say, don't we all agree that there isn't a genocide in South Africa? Let's all agree on that. Lady here on the end.
I wonder, Debra, then, thank you all, by the way, for your time. I wonder, given your comment, what would you then have the policy change to? Because I think the important part of defining, you know, what's happening when you agree on facts on the ground is then you can agree how to change policy. So what would you change the policy to?
Sure. I mean, so I would, for example, Josh has talked quite a bit about enforcing US laws vis-a-vis conditions that are applied to supplying US weapons. That is something that I, you know, like a new policy was very actively engaged in for a long time. And another, for example, very much related to what we see here, the Biden administration imposed sanctions on violent settlers. That was something that the organization that I was working for was extremely involved in culling support from members of Congress, and that is something that should still be in place. And the Trump administration, of course, ended that on day one.
Yes.
So, there are, and in general, the United States should be adopting policies that enable ultimately a resolution of the conflict between these two sides. Before that's going to happen, we're going to have to spend a whole lot of time and money reconstructing Gaza, which is something that I've also advocated for. I mean, this is a strip of land that has obviously been turned largely to rubble. So that is obviously vital, and none of that requires adopting particular terminology. And I would rather focus. I would rather focus on the particular policies than.
So on that note, to wrap up,
Yeah.
let me ask you all the same question just to end. You mentioned about reconstructing Gaza at a time, we're speaking on a day where the finance minister Smotrich said, we are here to conquer, cleanse, and stay. He said, we are going to disassemble Gaza and leave it as rubble.
Yeah.
What does the West Bank look like a year from now, in your view? Josh, do you want to go first?
Maybe it's good that I'm going first so that one of you can end on a more uplifting note. Since I served in the West Bank in 2008, 2009, it was my sense that the path that it was on at the time was ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And I have not yet seen something in the region that indicates any change to that path. In fact, I would say just an acceleration is what we have seen in the last year and a half. The one thing that I think we can find some hope on is, or the two things are, first of all, that same tenacity and dignity of the Palestinian people on the ground that we saw of the people in Masafa Yatta and that we see every single day in Gaza. And two, the shift that really is happening here in the United States, but which needs to continue to be pulled into the mainstream of American public debate and American politics.
Debra?
So the question is what we expect Gaza's going to look like a year from now?
And the West Bank.
Oh, and the West Bank as well.
Where will we be?
Where will we be? I mean, it's hard for me. I feel like, Josh, it's not exactly fair for you to put pressure on us to, deliver optimism. The comments made about President Trump notwithstanding earlier, I had certainly argued before the election that as much as I disagreed with the way the Biden administration handled so much about this issue, that a second Trump administration would be worse. And I think we're seeing that. And so, obviously the role that the United States plays, I think we all here, we're here because we feel it's extremely important. What President Trump does is going to be absolutely pivotal. And I'm, all things considered with that, I'm not terribly optimistic. I'm hopeful that perhaps other actors like the Europeans, you were talking about the association agreement, that perhaps other countries will step up, but I don't know that I see that as enough to really turn the tide. So I think we need to continue doing the work here in the United States. I think that's absolutely pivotal. But I wish I could give a more optimistic assessment of where I think we're going to be a year from now.
Zaha, last word.
Okay. So I agree with Josh. The outlook doesn't look good. If things continue as they are and President Trump doesn't step in with serious threats to Netanyahu, then I think we are going to see mass death in Gaza and in the West Bank. The settlers have become so emboldened, and we have so many settlers now who are in the military. I fear that worse than ethnic cleansing, we're going to see another Gaza inside the West Bank. I do have a slight bit more hope about this president. And I know that sounds crazy, but this president, unlike the previous president, has shown daylight between himself and Netanyahu. He does not seem to like Netanyahu. He likes Israel. He supports the release of the hostages. He's concerned about that. He likes the Gulf Arab countries. He wants to have a Saudi-Israel normalization agreement. He wants to have that feather in his cap. No other president has done it, and he wants to have that kind of achievement. So that is the one glimmer of hope that perhaps he might pursue, a real, I don't want to say peace agreement, because we've already seen his peace to prosperity plan, which was really to resolve all the issues in Israel's favor, but at least to stop the killing, to at least support a permanent ceasefire and to allow humanitarian assistance to get into Gaza.
We can only hope. Zaha, Josh, Debra, thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Thank you to Congresswoman Jayapal and Senator Welch for hosting this screening, where it's actually hard to watch this film. Hollywood hasn't made it easy to watch this film, which won an Oscar. So appreciate the members of Congress who hosted this screening and this panel. Appreciate those who turned up. And I hope the rest of them will actually watch the film to see what they're voting to fund and support. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.